Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Comics Della Morte, episode 121, Creating Horror with Rick Kitagawa. Thank you for coming on. This is a brand new guest for anybody that's going to watch it live or replay afterwards.
Hello, everyone. So grateful to be here. Thanks for having me, Ronnie.
Not a problem. You know, sometimes I like to go on Instagram or Twitch to find people who are working in comics or especially, or even not comics, because we've had actresses, storyboard artists, and other people who work in the horror genre because, you know, horror and sci-fi and all that stuff is great. And it definitely made a big impact on pop culture, especially nowadays where you have movies from the 80s that probably didn't do so well that now are like really big in today's culture. So before we get into showing your work or anything, tell people a little bit about who you are and how you got started in the business. Probably starting with as a kid. When did you first fall in love with monsters and sci-fi and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, totally. So I'm a visual artist, game designer, author, writer. I keep myself busy, but pretty much everything I do revolves around monsters. And so, and what up to Running Man? Hello. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
I am so kind of the origin story, if you will, started, for whatever reason, as a little kid, I'm very, and still today, I'm very drawn to a specific color, which is kind of like everything in the blue-green spectrum. So like teal is one of my favorite colors, like robin's egg, seafoam, like that whole kind of color spectrum. And I remember growing up really liking that color, and like those were my favorite crayons in the in the box. And I was just kind of disappointed that humans aren't in that color spectrum. Like I was really into like reptiles, fish, dinosaurs, because one, they look kind of cooler than people do, in my opinion, and are of that color, right? I mean, we know dinosaurs might not be green or whatever, but at the time in the 80s when I was growing up, I was like, oh yeah, dinosaurs are green, that's awesome. Lizards and chameleons are green and blue, and that's awesome. And I wish people were more like that. And so really early on, I was really drawn to kind of like these more reptilian or like fish or wild. They have so many different morphologies.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so I was really into like naturey stuff, and that sort of translated really early on into a love of just like one, Halloween in general, but then through Halloween I got exposed to like the classic Universal monsters. And so probably one of my favorite monsters of all time and now that you know this history of like reptiles and amphibians and stuff, it makes perfect sense. But it's Creature from the Black Lagoon and Godzilla. And those two.
Awesome. Well, you're answering a lot of questions I would answer in towards the end after we talk about your work. But sure. Since we're just shooting the breeze, why? Because usually I ask at the end of the show, like, out of all the Universal monsters, Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman, who's your favorite? But you already answered the Creature from the Black Lagoon, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Creature by far is my favorite, mainly because like it really represents to me this idea of sort of feeling disconnected or alienated from society in a lot of ways. Or just, and like, I had a pretty normal childhood growing up. For the most part, like I come from a lower middle class family. Like my parents owned the home I grew up in, and so there's a lot of privilege there. There's not a whole lot where I'm like, oh, like this made me hate humanity or anything, but it was very much just feeling like I was different, or like I didn't belong, or like I was the only one really into monsters back then. I didn't have a community, so I just felt like like I felt like I was different in a lot of ways. And so
but there was a lot of great movies in the 80s. I mean, if you were born in the 80s like me, I don't know how old you are, but one of the best monsters versus kids movies are the Monster Squad, man. And I don't know if you remember that movie, The Monster Squad.
Oh yeah, I most certainly do, and I loved it because partially because it had like what I thought was a superior creature design, like the
Yeah,
Gillman.
the creature from the Black Lagoon, I still think that's one of the best designs I've ever seen of that creature being made. Hands
Oh
down.
100%, 100% agreed. But like for me, the creature, it's like the creature is just like a fish dude who's just like
Yeah.
hanging out in the Amazon, and then a
Hmm.
bunch of other people come in, and then like when he's like, "What's this?" They're like, "Oh my gosh, it's a monster that's poisoned the lake. Let's like shoot him." And like it's kind of this tragedy in a lot of ways of how I see most like mainstream society reacting to things that are different or like not mainstream. And
Oh, of
so
course.
like I 100% kind of related more to the creature than I did to the like the rest of the people like in the film. And also, uh being a person of Japanese descent, like I'm fifth generation American, but
Hmm.
like I'll I'll show my camera just real quick. I have my camera off, everyone, just FYI, because of lag and stuff. But hello, sorry if my audio is terrible now. Um, but you know, being a person of Japanese descent who looks Japanese, um, like I think I never really related to most of the like the hero characters in Hollywood, especially because there's just a lack of Asian American representation. So,
Yeah.
so for me, I was like, oh yeah, I relate more to the fish dude than all of the the other people, the actors playing the heroes, quote unquote,
Hmm.
in the film. And so, yeah, so that's kind of where Creature came from. Sorry to answer questions out of order, but
Oh no, not a problem,
yeah.
not a problem. So you fell in love with monsters and everything, and you love the creature from the Black Lagoon as your favorite. When at one point did you start drawing and writing stories of your own? Because me as a kid, I watched a lot of horror movies I probably shouldn't as a kid, and growing up watching also too Tales from the Crypt. At what point did you stop drawing like what you've seen on the TV and try to create your own stuff from your own imagination?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thinking back, like I remember kind of like still like I got into drawing at a very young age, and then
Hmm.
I actually didn't do a whole, excuse me, didn't do a whole lot of drawing actually for I would say between like honestly between like fifth grade and like freshman year in college. I did very little
Hmm.
uh artwork, surprisingly. And so I actually went to college, got a degree, and then decided that I wanted to pursue art. So then I went back to school for a art degree, and that's kind of when I really started uh, doing my own thing. I would say was really like in that. Uh, I went back to art school when I was 23. And so, for a good 20 years, I wasn't really making art. And then it wasn't until 2006, 2007 that I really started like making my own stuff, I think. To be honest, it might have been later because I think in those early stages, I
Yeah.
was still just trying to learn how to draw, right? How to paint. And so it was just kind of like paint whatever's around, or like, you're like doing drapery studies and like,
Hmm. Yeah.
um, foundational stuff, which I think is really important, but also isn't as cool as drawing monsters. And so I think it was probably maybe my second or third year in art school when I was taking a screen printing class, and I decided to do a triptych of wanted posters for cryptids. And so I did like the Jersey Devil, the Chupacabra, and
Awesome.
Mothman. And yeah, I think that was kind of the turning point of when I was really like, yeah, like monsters or like dark stuff. Like I think I had been like really just trying to like say interesting things with my artwork prior to that. And then um I wouldn't say I really got into monsters like deeply until probably I graduated and I started going to conventions and seeing that I'm like, oh, there's other people that just make monster artwork. Like,
Yeah.
because for a long time I was like, being classically trained, like I can do pretty, photorealistic oil paintings and like very, I can do landscapes and all this kind of stuff.
But
But
see,
then I
that's
was
a
like,
good thing that you learned that first, because I mean, you haven't really done comics that I know of that when we talked on Twitch. But the idea that I always say that besides just learning how to draw figures, it's important to learn how to draw backgrounds, because the background, the scenery, tells the story of itself. And it's very great if you could find a way, like say the creature from the Black Lagoon, if you could find ways to use color and nature itself and make it look like a scary atmosphere while you're drawing the monster too, because it's just as important as the creature itself. Because you don't want to go in a scary place like that, because you know something's, if you go in a scary place like that, you're going to know that you're going to meet something like that.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, like backgrounds, like I don't do a whole lot of backgrounds in my artwork because it's kind of ironic in that my wife is also a visual artist, and she works in like animation and VR and all sorts of doing cool stuff. But like she predominantly focused on backgrounds, and then I focused on figures. And so it's kind of a weird thing that we both like she can do characters. Obviously I can do backgrounds. I just don't enjoy it as much, but like it really does sell everything so importantly, right? It's like, yeah, like the character is important, but like the atmosphere, the storytelling, there's so much extra that can be done. And this is like, you know, like I'm slowly transitioning into more writing and focusing on screenwriting right now. But so much of it is the atmosphere, right? Because you're like, especially writing horror, like if you watch any horror movie and you just turn off the sound, or like you like don't see it lit, like you see a behind the scenes shot where it's completely lit, you're just like, oh, this just looks like a normal house. But it's like, oh, because we're lighting it a certain way, oh, because like, you know, of this certain camera angle, all of these other things, and because of the music, now the house is creepy as hell.
Yeah,
right?
like
So,
perfect example, Crystal Lake, you know.
yeah. It's just a nice little pond, you know. You're like, oh, this is cool, but it's like all of the story, and like also the Spanish moss, but also like just the music and the way they light it and everything else, the fog. That's what makes it like terrifying. So, yeah, I totally agree with you. But yeah, so long story short, I guess is probably maybe 2000, like. Yeah, probably like 2010, 2011 is when I really kind of like started trying to build my own worlds and like write my own stories, and kind of focus more on creating my own stuff, really.
Awesome. Now, when you started drawing and everything, then you got to screenplays. Like, have any of your screenplays adapted to actual movie, or they're just out there right now if someone wants to pick them up?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm pretty much a year in to screenplay writing. Like like I've written short stories. I have a collection of short stories out, which people can pick up on Amazon or off my website from my store. But
Which I got your the links that you sent me. I got them in the description for anybody that wants to click on them.
Awesome, thank you. Go check it out and buy my books. But no, self-promotion aside, yeah, like writing, I've been writing short stories mainly since probably like 7th grade. And I blog and write around creativity, and I've done a lot of writing around like leadership development and some other stuff which is more towards my day job type thing. But in terms of script writing, I'm only a year into it. I have one feature script and a short, and I'm working on kind of juggling 3 other ideas. But yeah, so right now nothing's been turned into a movie yet. But if you've read it, or if you work in the industry and you want to read it, definitely let me know. You can find those on my website as well.
Well, it's awesome every time when I hear stuff like this, because I've had friends who've been on the show. Well, I consider friends now. They've been on the show quite a bit of times, and a lot of them that are comic book makers, a lot of their scripts started out as a screenplay, and then they found a way to adapt it into a comic, even though it was originally a screenplay. But with you writing the screenplay for horror and everything, like how would you say it would be difficult for you who started off doing visual art and now having to get into like, okay, how am I going to think about this on setting the mood in words? Because, you know, especially people in comic books, you know, you have people that are mostly focused on writing, people are mostly focused on the ink or the colors. Like, was it easy for you to jump in to that since you started young writing short stories? Or when you actually sat down, it's like, okay, writing a short story versus a, you know, screenplay, that's like two different, you know, monsters right there in itself.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think it was very comfortable for me to go into writing because as I'm writing like any short story, I think I have a pretty good picture in my head of what I'm trying to describe. And so it's sort of
Mhm.
like me looking at, you know, like an image and then saying like, okay, how would I describe this? How would I pace this? Like I see the action happening,
Yeah.
like how do I describe that in a way that's, you know, interesting or, you know, at pacing, and like there's all the stuff that goes into the writing side of it. So for me, it's and I haven't done, I wouldn't say anything in terms of a traditional comic, but I've done a lot of like zine or like panel comics or like short kind of sequential work, um, sort of as exercises or as like to show at like zine fests and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But and so I think that really helped with me when I started doing screenwriting. But
Yeah.
I also have a tendency, um, and this is kind of some of the big feedback I've gotten recently when I've had the luck of having someone who's worked in the industry kind of review some of like my current uh feature script,
Mm.
is that like I still I'm also trying to write complex enough characters that the feedback has been reading this script. I totally get everyone's motivation, but thinking from it from a visual perspective, I don't know
Mhm.
if I would see it. And I also have a theater background, so I tend to really focus a lot on the dialogue as opposed to maybe the descriptions or stuff like that. So, and I think in the next draft, I'll address that obviously a lot more, but that's been kind of my biggest challenge is that like I think I have a lot of different influences, and that sort of maybe pulls me, you know, I'm like, oh, I've written like stage plays before in college when I was doing theater. And so
Yeah.
I tend to lean on that because I'm like, oh, I'm writing again. That's kind of what I do. But then I'm like, oh, wait, no, movies are very different from theater in that,
Oh yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
theater is so dialogue based while movies are so action and like, you know, music. Like it's a full collaborative production, a little bit more so more intensely focused on visuals than say theater does. So that's kind of what I've been struggling with, and where I feel uh you know, like the past might be getting in the way a little bit, if that makes sense.
No, most definitely. I mean, I didn't major it, but I have a history of theater arts as well, with the whole center stage, backstage, and you know, you writing, trying to write a script for a movie versus where a certain actor should be positioned on the stage in front of the audience is two different things. But that's why a lot of actors, you know, some of them will say, doing theater arts on stage is more difficult than a movie because you have to remember how to do this so much and everything is live. So, you know, you're hoping for nothing to mess up. You
Yeah.
know, I know there's been times in my time where someone goes in a closet, the door handle breaks, they can't get out, so you have to go to a black screen so no one sees other people going on. So yeah, it's quite difficult.
Yeah,
But
agreed. And I think it's just, you know, it's different because interestingly enough, like I when I was doing acting, I was fortunate enough to get like some commercial work and stuff like that back
mhm,
when I was still in college. And I it was interesting because I was so used to acting, like the level of emotion you have to do for theater, because you know people are like 50 to 100 feet away trying to like read your emotions.
yeah.
It's versus having a camera that's like hyper zoomed in and can see your pores. It's a
Mhm.
much more reserved type of acting. Um, and or I don't want to say reserved. It's a much more subtle type of acting. And so for me, that was like a really big struggle because every director I would work with, they'd always be like, "You do theater, like you're a theater actor, aren't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "Okay, like tone it down like 70%, and that's what we need for like a
I'm
camera."
surprised you didn't go into voice acting because that would have been perfect.
Well, thank you. I didn't know, to be honest. I have heard that feedback from a lot of people, and I'm very grateful for that. And I think I've never pursued voice acting mainly because I had a speech impediment growing up, and
Gotcha. Yeah.
so for the longest time, like it's funny because literally most of my paid work in the past 20 some years has all been around me talking to people. But as a kid, like in high school, like I still talked a lot, but I still like was very hyper conscious of my voice. And so it wasn't, like I got made, you get teased and made fun of and stuff a lot. And then it's, a lot of the kids you go to when my speech impediment was really bad, you know,
Yeah.
I went to high school with. And so it's still like I just assumed that I still was like mispronouncing all of these words. And then it wasn't even until far later that I even thought about going into acting or any sort of performance art because it wasn't until I met someone who had a very strong speech impediment and they were like acting on stage and like no one seemed to care. And I was like, you don't hear like he has a speech impediment and he's still doing theater. And like I never brought that up and no one ever mentioned it. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And so that sort of what kind of gave me the courage to start going into theater and doing, I was pursuing more of the theater art before I went into the visual side of things.
Gotcha. That's cool.
Yeah.
So out of writing and artwork, you got you're doing so much. Which one do you feel you are more called to? Because you're doing all these different projects, but like if you had to choose one, what would be your key interest to focus on the most, the writing or the artwork?
That is a very good question. I think for me, I don't know if I could actually choose, to be honest, because I feel like with my visual art, I end up writing a lot, even in terms of just like, oh, this is the description, or like this is a story behind the piece, or something like that. And then like with the writing, I feel like I end up coming up like with like I recently had the luck of and fortune of being juried into the Pasadena International Film Festival recently for just a screenplay. I did not have a finished film, which I didn't even know was like a thing you could do for until recently. And but so my script made it to the screenplay and got nominated for a feature award. And so, but I was the only one or one of two people that were just writers that had promotional images and like postcards.
Well,
like,
congrats on that.
Yeah, thank you. And so for me, it was kind of like it ends up being this thing where the visual builds the writing and the writing builds the visual, and I think they are sort of in a lot of ways the same thing for me, because at the end of the day, it's really just about building these worlds and building these stories and building these monsters. And I think no matter if you were to constrain me and take away my paints, I would then write. And if you were to like take away my pens and keyboard, I would then draw on the dirt. Like, I don't know. Like, I think regardless, I'm going to try to find a way to integrate both into the work that I'm making.
No, for sure. I mean, I remember like growing up as a kid in the 80s and 90s, and the book fair would come by. Most of the kids, they would buy the latest, like this book, that book, like the Berenstain books. But me, when the mobile book fair would come around in a little car, I would always try to buy how to draw Greek gods, how to draw mythical creatures. And Yeah, it's just really fun to draw the supernatural and the unknown because you could do so much with it. I mean, look throughout history with movies, everybody has their own version of a werewolf or a vampire or any other creature.
Yeah, totally. I love that you brought up the book fair. I hadn't thought about book fairs for like probably legit like a decade, but I remember, yeah, Goosebumps were
Oh
my
yeah.
favorite book ever because not only were the stories good, but then I also love the cover art, right? I was like, yes,
Mhm.
like it has the slime font, and then you have like the really creepy covers, and I was like, this is I think that maybe that's what I'm saying is that like this integration between the two is really what makes, and this is why I love comic books too and sequential stuff,
Yeah.
because it's really that mix of visual world building, writing, all together in something you can hold in your hand.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's why it's important to have your front cover be really well designed because it can make or break what you're trying to sell. Even if you're just writing like you have done a short story, if your cover art is not eye-catching, then no one's going to even want to pick it up and see what it's all about.
Yeah, and I find myself, very fortunate because I have a lot of writer friends, and I belong in some creative communities, and a lot of them, like the book cover design part, is so much of a struggle for them because they're writers and not artists, and so.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm always like, oh, I'm going to design it this way, and like, oh, like what other, like I'm looking in graphic design blogs to be like, what can I take from this and what can I take from that, and like, oh,
Yeah.
this painting would be really good, or like, maybe I can take this stock photo and then like I'll paint over that part, and so it's actually like that's like the fun treat for me. While I know most authors are like, oh, this is so hard, like, and I have to pay someone and all of this, and I'm just like, oh yeah, now I get to like have an extra creative burst of energy to try to figure out how to create this cover that's going to be compelling.
Well, exactly. I mean, some posters nowadays, some movie posters nowadays are pretty good, but I hate a lot of movie posters now because it's just pictures of the actors. The thing I loved about the 80s and 90s is that you would have an artist to paint the poster of the movie, and that poster would be so amazing looking, or like, we'll just say the Goonies.
Oh yeah.
There was no point in the movie with the Goonies that all of them were like holding on each other's feet, dangling from a rock. They never had that part of the in the movie, but that one part literally sold people to go see it. And even with horror movies, like the John Carpenter's The Thing or any other movie out there, I just love when it was all art instead of just photography for the movie poster.
Totally. Like I think like I love all of the like I love looking at artists who make like unlicensed or like fake movie posters for movies
Oh
because
yeah.
like it's all like hand drawn or silk screens and stuff. Like
Mhm.
um those are always so inspiring, especially like people who really understand, who are not just illustrators, but who are also very skilled designers.
Yeah.
And that's always like just blows me away when you see something like so compelling and interesting where they're mixing like these classic elements of the film that, to your point, don't necessarily have to be in the movie, but then
Mhm.
just like sell the idea of what we have of stuff. Super I, like I am not a I don't consider myself a very good designer, but I very much appreciate good design.
Oh yeah, sure. Now with the you did video games, what is like did you 3D print those creatures? Like I don't know if you could show them on the camera. I can't remember what you call them, but like on your shop you have pictures of like little toys that you sell for like $100.
Yeah, you got this guy, Nightmare Chan. Doo-doo-doo. Yeah, so these are and is my audio coming out okay?
The audio's chopping, so if you just want to put it up against the camera a little bit and then show the people, and then we could go back to the regular audio without the camera.
Okay, so going back to audio, so I showed you a little preview. So Nightmare Chan is a actual soft vinyl toy, and so I actually worked with a factory to get him produced. I ran a backer kit crowdfunding campaign. Shout out to all of the people who helped make that happen. But so I sculpted it traditionally in a wax-based clay, cast it. I did a resin version, sent that off to the factory, and then they made the molds and everything to slush cast that in vinyl. And so I do sculpt. I do have some resin stuff. I also have the soft vinyl toys. I also paint other people's vinyl toys. Like if I'll buy a blank and be like, yo, can I paint this up? And they're like, sure. And then so those will go in my shop. But yeah, so they are, mine at least aren't 3D printed. I'm more of I actually, even though I work digital a lot, I actually prefer traditional mediums. So sculpting is something that I did not learn in school and was very much self-taught and like taking online classes and stuff like that. And so all of that kind of stuff is all still very much kind of the traditional route.
Yeah. I mean, this is an idea that I could throw out at you, but I mean, it'll be a lot of work, but have you ever thought about writing a screenplay for stop motion? Because if you have a history of like scoping and stuff, you could literally shoot your own movie with like stop motion monsters or whatever that you could scope with. Because a lot of people are getting into that whole like art form because you don't see a lot of that anymore, but people are like drawn to it and wanting to get back into making movies like that.
Yeah, I've been considering it. So I'm friends with this guy Mark Thompson. His artist name is Monstark. He's based up in Portland, and yeah, he's such an inspiration because he is making puppets out of like random stuff. He makes sets out of like trash that he has, and it's just like super inspiring because he just makes and shoots these stop motion films, and like he just runs and guns it, and they're great, and it's super cool to see. And I don't know, like I think I'm pulled in too many ways where like I'm taking classes right now online to like learn how to be like, oh, I want to make a full silicone monster mask. And I think my ambition constantly gets in the way of me just doing stuff. But I'm definitely more like talking to some folks. I'm like, you know what? Like if I can come up with something that fits stop motion, I'm definitely interested in making my own at a film that way. I've also been playing around with learning a little bit about Blender, the like the 3D software, open source that's completely free, and you can animate in that. And so I've been like, oh, like is there a story or a short that like makes sense to be animated more? And so right now I've been focused so much on trying to get this next feature out the door, mainly because in terms of a screenwriting career, most agents and stuff don't really pay attention to you until you have multiple scripts because they want to know, because agents and managers and reps all work on commission. They take a percentage of how much money you make. They want to make sure you're like super serious and that you are able to produce a consistent quality of work. So that's kind of like career wise, I'm focused on getting more scripts out, as opposed to necessarily shooting something myself. But that's always in the back of my mind of, if there's a story that I'm like, you know what, I could do a proof of concept, figure this out and shoot it in Blender or shoot it, stop motion wise, I 100% will. But for me, it's more about finding the right story and where that fits the medium more so than say live action or something. And shout out to Skull's Army. What's up, my friend? Thanks for coming by.
Yeah, thank you for stopping by. So that's awesome. Now, getting into some questions with the horror stuff, like, do you have a favorite horror movie of all time? Like, it could be now or back then as a kid, and why does it make such a big impact of being your favorite?
Yeah, it is a hard question to pick a single favorite, but I think in terms of filmmaking, one of my absolute favorites is probably 28 Days Later,
That's a good
because
one.
it's like, I mean, beyond introducing kind of, or, credited with introducing running zombies or fast zombies, like, and coming, and like, that was really one of the first movies to see the zombie outbreak as like a biological pathogen, as opposed to just like, magic, or like hell has gotten too full, so the dead are coming back or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, like, beyond that, I think that was one of the first films where I really understood how, like, the monsters are really just a metaphor for stuff that people have to deal with. And
Oh, for
the
sure.
fact that in that film, it's actually like, the zombies are just kind of an environmental thing, and it's
Mhm.
really the humans that are the terrifying monsters.
Yeah.
And so that was like very, I think, instrumental in me in being like, oh my gosh, this is how you make a film, and like the metaphor and the theme all works into the plot. And I was like, oh, like that made it really clear to me, because I think, like, I'm drawn to like all sorts of schlocky movies, like, I don't know, like Velocipaster, or like, like any random horror movie that has a monster. I'll be like, yeah, I'll watch that. Like, especially if
Yeah.
it's a rubber suit type monster. I'm like, I am 100% in for practical effects and weird people wearing monster masks. But
Oh yeah, I mean, I love this movie to death, and I'm happy that it's such a big pop culture movie now that it's getting its own video game. I love Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Can't get enough of that movie.
yeah, totally. Killer Clowns is great. Um, but yeah, I think for me, the other one that I would say besides 28 Days Later, if I could choose a second one, would probably be Get Out.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think for me, like, that does such a good job of weaving kind of like a social commentary into a horror narrative, and having that be, like, this whole idea of like brain surgery and stuff being like, there's just so many like layers of metaphor and commentary in there. And like, I bought the Get Out, like the script version of Get Out, and I've like
Oh wow.
studied it. I probably
Yeah.
read it like 10 to 12 times, because it has Jordan Peele's commentary in it. And
hmm
it's like, there's stuff that I was like, oh my gosh, this one little thing which I totally didn't, I was just like, oh, I get the main metaphor of like race relations and, all of this stuff. But then, like, there's like these little subtle shots, and like that still influenced, like, Jordan Peele talks about how that was like a metaphor for this other aspect of, the Black American experience, or this other aspect of this character. And I was just like, oh my gosh, the thoughtfulness
hmm
in this film is just on the, next level. And I was like, oh, like, this is why it resonates so well with, beyond casual viewers, but it also just like crushed it with critics too. So
Yeah.
it's really, I think those two films really make me think about, like, that's like, those are the types of movies I want to make, is something that is that thoughtful and crafted. And that level of skill is what I'm very far from, I would say, but is what I'm trying to achieve.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's one of those things you could make a horror movie have a bunch of jump scares, but it doesn't terrify you on a psychological level. And Get Out really does that, and that's why I believe it did so well, because it's messes with your head, and it's just not like a physical thing like with the zombies running. That's terrifying, but like you said, with the people being more of the bigger threat than the zombies are. That's why I think the franchise Dead Rising video game does so well, is that they make the humans be the main threat.
100%. I mean, and that's really like what Walking Dead is all about too, right?
Yeah.
Is that like
Mhm.
that it's never like beyond the first like 5 episodes, like the zombies are just like they're just there. Like they figured out how to deal with it. It's like dealing with like all of the different, colonies and
Mhm.
Negan and the like the piratey one-eyed guy or whatever. Like
Yeah.
it was a long time ago, but like all of that is really what's terrifying, right? Like
Mhm.
that's way more disturbing to me than some like reanimated dead thing shuffling towards me.
Yeah, for sure. Now, when it comes to like horror movie slashers, like, do you have a slasher that really you just can't get enough of, like Michael Myers, Freddy, Jason? Like, who made the biggest impact on you as like a creator, or even like just as a kid growing up?
Yeah, to be honest, like I've seen most, like pretty much most of the like all of the slasher stuff.
Mhm.
But like they weren't really uh a big part of my life growing up. Like I think they actually just creep me out too much for me to watch those films as a kid. Because I
Gotcha.
think like monsters were something I related to. And
Hmm.
then like the slashers, I think and to be very frank, I had my aunt was murdered when I was like 8 years old. And so I
Oh,
think
sorry to hear that.
yeah, thank you. But I think like the slasher genre, because it's just so much focused on like legit killing folks, and it's
Yeah.
less kind of on like, oh, like look at this interesting creature.
Hmm.
Like they like I still love like now I'm like, oh yeah, I really like Hellraiser, which isn't if you count Hellraiser as a slasher, I'd probably say like Pinhead is probably one of my favorites. But
Yeah.
um, like I've seen all of the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street stuff and
Hmm.
Halloween. But I think I've always just been more into the uh like the definitely like the monster movie. So I think like if I had to choose a slasher, it's probably like Hellraiser or Freddy
Hmm.
Krueger
Gotcha.
because they're the most like supernatural.
Hmm.
Not to say that, like a lot of people love Jason just because he like can't be killed. And I'm like, yeah, that is supernatural and very cool. But I think it's something about like Freddy gets to like weave in and out of dreams and like
Yeah.
create nightmares and monsters. And I thought that was kind of cool. And then I really just love the Cenobites because of
Yes.
the
Hmm.
character design and like they look
Yeah.
terrifying. And I'm like, that's pain to me is more scary than death as well. So, um,
Well, what I love about horror, it's one of those things that if you draw horror, write horror, or even if you're a horror fan, everyone is not going to have the same taste of horror. Like, you could have people that love slasher movies, or you could have people that love nothing but like horror movies that take place in space, like Aliens or Event Horizon. Or you have people who love creature features, like, oh, I'm not big on Freddy or Jason, but I love horror movies like Critters and all that stuff.
yeah, I that's true. Like I really do love the diversity and kind of different
Hmm.
genres and that people can fall in love with whatever creeps them out. And it's like I'm not really into like the Saw franchise or like Hostel and like any of
Hmm.
the quote unquote torture porn stuff. But I'm definitely a creature feature guy. I like supernatural stuff.
Yeah.
You know, Exorcist and kind of like Conjuring and all of that kind of possession and ghosts and stuff. But I think at the end of the day, I'm definitely the creature feature type, and it could be in space. You could give me a xenomorph. You could give me I really don't care as long as it looks like weird.
Yeah. Gotcha. Were you ever a fan of the full moon features, like Puppet Master and stuff like that?
I think I like didn't really get into it when I was a kid, and that for some reason, like I'm familiar with all of them, but I don't know. I think I've sort of like missed a lot of those, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, chalk it up. Like I didn't really get like it was interesting. Like I could watch. So I was born in '83, And
85. So
yeah,
not too much older than me.
yeah, right around the same age. And I didn't watch a whole lot of horror movies until I was probably like 13 or 14. And so like, but I think because like Godzilla, most of those are like PG or like rated G. I don't know what Godzilla is rated. The old movies, but like
Mhm.
Godzilla and like the Universal monster movies, because they're all black and white and not super scary. Like I would watch those, and so I think that's why I'm very much um focused on like the monsters and like Puppet Master and stuff. I was just kind of like, it's puppets. I don't
Mhm.
know. There's like to me because of the color thing. I'm also like, they're just like black and white and like. I don't know. They're not green puppets. If they were green puppets, I bet you I would have tried to watch it.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things like I don't get me wrong, there are some horror movies out there where the monster being especially special effects looks great, but I'm all about like old school like, puppets and animatronics. That's why I still think and it's my favorite horror movie of all time. John Carpenter's The Thing. Just the aliens and the creature in that movie is just so iconic and just so like terrifying. I don't know. I just love old school movies. Even the Universal Monster, like the Wolfman, the makeup on that is just so great of its time period. And people try to regenerate that and like computer animate it, and they just can't capture that look because they're trying to capture it with the computer instead of authentic stuff.
Yeah, I love practical effects. Like I'm 100 like The Thing, super amazing. Like, yeah, I'm all for practical effects because it just like I love filmmakers now who are willing to like push practical as much as they can. Like I get it.
Oh
Like
yeah,
certain
for
stuff
sure.
like you need VFX and you need, like color grading and lighting and all of the other post production, but like when you can like push uh practical as much as possible. Like I really like, the recent Evil Dead reboots or remakes, whatever you want to call them, like the
Mhm.
2013 and Evil Dead Rise. I was like, the amount of practical stuff in there is just like so makes it so unsettling because you're like, oh, I know this doesn't look like computer generated and it's really creepy.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, big fan of the practical stuff of any age.
Now, with you being, drawing and writing horror, like some people say yes, some people say no, but you kind of answered it with the whole like torture porn. Like some artists and writers, they don't try to have a limit. With you, is there a limit that you just won't go to? It's like, okay, I'm not going to draw or write this type of scene.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my I don't know if I necessarily have like a subject matter I
Hmm.
won't look into, but I think I definitely have uh standards around like how I portray stuff, if that
Yeah,
makes sense. Like, I think like it's kind of like if it doesn't move the story forward and if it's not saying something about or like expressing my opinion of something and it's just kind of to shock people, I like that's just not my style. Like I'm, like cool, go off and make, Human Centipede 17, like totally
no,
fine.
I hate those
Um
movies.
yeah, but it's just like not what it's not like the story that I want to tell, right? And so
Oh
like
yeah, for sure.
I'm very like I think it's very tempting to make like rape revenge stories. Like I've written one, but then I look back and kind of like, especially in film, uh, I'm very conscious of like, is this needed? Is this inspiring fear? Or is it just kind of like we want an excuse to have like this naked chick on stage? Like I mean, and so for me, it's really about making sure that you're doing things in a way that uh actually inspires horror and is sane and is like part of a story as opposed to like just being exploitative or um graphic for graphic's sake. Like I'm all for body horror. I'm all for like seeing stuff getting chopped off, and like I'm not, cannibalism. Like I'm like, oh, that's all fine. But I think it's really just like, well, how are we doing it? Why are we doing it? And
like you said, the whole torture board thing. Like, is it really something that's going to progress the story, or is it that's just there because you want a shock value? Like, to me, a horror movie has to be scary. If you're just making a horror movie that's going to make me throw up more than be terrified, then it's not for me.
Yeah, same here. Like I think it does need to like the stuff I create. My kind of own standards is it should be creepy, it should be supernatural, and it needs to like tell a story in some way. And so like a lot of my work is like my artwork oftentimes is focused on and I think this goes back to my aunt, is really about like creating female characters that can easily just like kill everybody. And so I'm big on like succubi and witches and like other female identifying monsters, but who have like fangs and have like horns and laser beams coming out of their eyes, and who are just like completely badasses and are going to be like the apex predators. Kind of is how I think about them.
Oh yeah, I mean, even besides monsters, like I've talked about this before, like sure, a lot of movies in the 80s, there was always a naked girl showing her breasts or stuff, but people forget that while the 80s were happening, you had all these action-packed movies with guys, but the horror franchise, especially with the 80s, were making the final girl as a hero, like literally Ripley from Aliens, Connor from Terminator, or even the final girls from like Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th. It was always like a woman destroying this supernatural being, and it really made girls have like a character that they can look up to, while the boys had like Arnold Schwarzenegger and all those to look up to in the action flicks.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of like, anti-sexism notes in horror, and I think that's like what I'm really drawn to, right? Is like I consider a lot of my like stuff I build like feminist horror, because it's like, it is trying to empower women and give them sort of like the badassness that like as a guy I was just kind of grew up on, right? Of like, to your point, like Arnold Schwarzenegger in Predator, right? And like the Space Marines. But then I'm like, Ripley is like fucking awesome. Like, and I think that the more we can have these well-developed characters of both genders and like everything, like I think the more we can tell interesting stories that resonate with more people. So that's kind of what I'm all about.
Yeah, I mean, especially with like, not like slashers, but with the supernatural, I think best as like from a writer standpoint, when you have a supernatural movie like The Ring or The Grudge, having like a creature that's a woman or especially a child is more terrifying, because usually, in society we think that, if we see like a woman or a boy out in the wilderness, we're going to go see if they need help than a man that's like somewhere in the wilderness, because in our mind we're like, okay, we got to help these people because society tells us that they're very weak. And that's why I think that some of the most terrifying movies, not like with the women, but like children, is more scarier than seeing a ghost like male.
100%. Like, man, like creepy kids are creepy. Like, give me some giant monster, because then I'm like, all right, maybe I can like shoot that down or something. But then it's like little creepy kid that's like floating or something. I'm like, nope, not dealing with that. Good luck, everybody else. I'm getting the hell out of there.
Exactly. Well, we're at the 55 minutes. I don't know if you want to add anything, but I think we had a pretty good show. We talked about bunch of monsters and all your cool stuff.
Yeah, no, happy. Thank you so much for having me. This has been awesome. I love talking creepy stuff with other people who appreciate horror. You know, like it's
Nope, not a
um,
problem. And you're more than welcome to come back on in the near future. I mean, sometimes if I don't have a new guest, I'll just contact, or if a returning guest wants to talk about certain stuff, because sometimes we do movie reviews on here. We'll talk about like random topics, like the whole topic on vampires, werewolves. I still haven't done a whole topic on like creatures from the Black Lagoon, so we could definitely talk about that more in depth or whatever.
yeah, that would be awesome. I will definitely be in touch. Thanks so much for having me, Ronnie.
Not a problem. Anyone who's like watching now, Running Man, Skull, you, of course, you popped on here for the first time, so you know Rick. But anybody watching on the reruns, go to the description on the YouTube channel here. Check out his website. It has all the links, his Instagram, his Twitter. Check out his shop. He has a bunch of clothing, merchandise. It's a big lot of stuff. I mean, if you don't want to buy a T-shirt, buy one of his action figures. It's really cool.
Yeah, thank you so much for the shout out. And yes, everyone, please visit. If you have any questions, I'm happy to email me, DM me. Love to chat with folks. So thanks again.
Not a problem. Good night. See you all next time.